My sister abandoned our dying mom and said she was in Kenya. Yesterday, I found her Instagram. She'd been living 2 towns over the whole time. I was on my knees scrubbing dried oatmeal out of the carpet when the bell over the diner door rang. It was 6:45 a.m. I had not slept. Mom had a bad night. She thought I was her sister, then she thought I was an intruder, then she wet herself and cried because she didn't know why she was crying. I changed her, changed the sheets, put her back in her recliner in front of the little space heater in our trailer because the furnace died in January and I couldn't afford to fix it. I came to work in my waitress uniform with Mom's oatmeal still on my sleeve. The bell rang, and I didn't look up. I said, "Sit anywhere, coffee's hot." Then I heard her laugh. That laugh. My older sister, Jenna, was standing in the doorway of Marcy's Diner in Cedar Falls, Iowa, wearing a camel coat I had seen on Instagram for $2,000. Blonde blowout. A Patek Philippe watch on her wrist that I knew cost $12,000 because I had Googled it at 2 a.m. while Mom was screaming. She said she was in Nairobi. 4 years ago, Jenna pulled up to my trailer with Mom in the passenger seat. Mom had one suitcase. Literally one old Samsonite with her name written on masking tape. Jenna looked at me through her open window and said, "I got accepted to that NGO in Kenya. It's a 2-year commitment. I can't take Mom. You are so much better at this stuff. Just for 2 years, Maya. I'll send money." She never sent $1. Her number went dead 3 weeks later. Her Facebook was all reposts about clean water in Africa. I was 26. I had a little graphic design freelance thing. I was supposed to move to Des Moines that month. I didn't. I learned how to change adult diapers. How to hold someone down who is fighting you because she thinks you are trying to poison her. How to watch your mother forget your name in real time. I filed bankruptcy last November. Medical bills, trailer lot rent, depends, the space heater bill. The suitcase she left is still by my front door because I never unpacked it. And there she was, ordering avocado toast in my diner. She didn't see me at first. She sat with a man in a Patagonia vest. She laughed, touching his arm, and said, "We closed on the Lakeview house last week. The kids are loving the private school. Lakeview is 2 towns over, 20 minutes away." I didn't say anything. I poured her coffee with a shaking hand. She looked up. "Oh, my God. Maya, that was yesterday. Day 1. I didn't scream. I didn't throw coffee. I just looked at her and said, 'Your table's coffee is hot.' I went home on my break and did what you do when you have been gaslit for 4 years. I started quietly collecting proof. I opened her Instagram on the diner computer. There was no Kenya. There was not one single photo of Africa. It was all Lakeview. The new house. A Tesla in the driveway. Her kids in private school uniforms at Cedar Academy. $18,000 a year per kid. Brunch dates. A charity gala for the Cedar Falls Arts Council. And that watch, posted 3 weeks ago with a caption that said, "You have to treat yourself after a hard year." I drove over to Lakeview after my shift ended. I sat in my beat-up car across the street from the brick house she tagged. It was real. It was massive, with landscaping lights glowing in the yard and her kids' bicycles parked on the green lawn. For 4 years, while I was 20 minutes away selling my own blood plasma to buy adult diapers, she had completely blocked my phone number, made a private social media account, and hid behind a fabricated overseas life, just so she wouldn't have to wipe her own mother's chin. When I got back to the trailer, Mom was sitting in her recliner in the dark, crying and asking for her mother who died of cancer in 1989. That night, I called our Aunt Carol. She is 70 years old, doesn't use the internet, and was the one organizing Mom's living memorial. Mom is still alive, but her mind is almost entirely gone, and Aunt Carol wanted to host a celebration of life in the church basement while Mom could still sit upright in a wheelchair and feel the room. I held the receiver to my ear and asked, "Is Jenna coming to the church tomorrow morning?" Aunt Carol gasped with excitement on the other end and said, "Yes, honey. She just called me from her hotel. She finally flew in from Kenya 2 days ago. Can you believe it? She agreed to give the opening reading for your mother." I didn't tell her about the Lakeview house. I just answered, "That's great, Aunt Carol. I'll see you there." Day 2. Today. The memorial. It was in the damp basement of the Methodist church. There were long folding tables covered in white paper rolls, crockpots full of meatballs, and a display board pinned with faded Polaroid photos of Mom from the 80s back, when she still knew our names. About 30 local townspeople were sitting in the metal chairs. Jenna walked in 10 minutes late wearing that expensive camel coat and the $12,000 watch. The man in the Patagonia vest, her husband, was walking right behind her. She moved through the room hugging old church ladies with tears in her eyes, acting like a weary humanitarian soldier finally returning home from a war zone. When the pastor handed her the microphone, she walked up to the podium, dabbed her eyes with a tissue, and looked out at the crowd. She took a shaky breath and said, "I have carried so much heavy guilt being so far away doing humanitarian work in Africa, while my baby sister carried the daily burden at home. Every single night in Kenya, I sat in the dark and prayed for my mother. I sent whatever money I could spare from my stipend, and I thanked God for our family." Aunt Carol was weeping in the front pew. Half the room was nodding with sympathy. I stood up from my chair in the back row. I hadn't planned out a speech. My legs just moved on their own. I looked straight at the podium and asked, "Where in Kenya were you living, Jenna?" The entire church basement went dead silent. 30 people turned their heads to look at me in my faded dress. Jenna froze for half a second, her knuckles turning white on the microphone stand, but she didn't panic. That is the thing about my sister. She never panics, and she never breaks down. She just smiled a cold, practiced, condescending smile at the crowd. She spoke into the mic in a soothing, motherly tone, saying, "Maya, honey, I know you are under an immense amount of caregiver stress right now. Watching Alzheimer's is traumatic. Let's not do this here in front of Mom's friends." I took 2 steps down the center aisle and said louder, "Where in Kenya were you living?" "Because I stood in your driveway in Lakeview yesterday afternoon. You have been living 20 minutes away from our trailer for 4 years." A loud murmur rippled through the folding chairs. The man in the Patagonia vest, her husband, stiffened in his seat, looking around the room in absolute confusion. He didn't know. She had told him the same lie she told the rest of the town. Jenna's jaw tightened, her eyes going ice cold as she doubled down on her script. She looked right at Aunt Carol and said, "I was based in Nairobi, but my security clearance required constant relocation. Maya has always struggled with severe paranoia and financial jealousy. I wired thousands of dollars for Mom's care through international transfers, but Maya spent it and rewrote history to play the martyr. I am not going to stand here and let my mentally ill sister ruin our mother's living memorial." That was her move. She didn't confess, and she didn't cry. She calmly tried to make me look like a screaming, unstable failure in front of the whole town. I stood there feeling the concrete floor tilting under my feet. I had no bank wire logs in my hand. All I had was bankruptcy papers in my glove box and the smell of oatmeal and depends on my skin. Then a quiet voice spoke up from the second row. "I don't know anything about international bank wires, Ms. Jenna, but I know who buys the groceries." It was Elena. She was Mom's visiting hospice nurse, a tired woman in blue medical scrubs who came to our trailer 3 mornings a week to check Mom's blood pressure. She had driven over on her lunch break just to sit in the back and support me because she knew I had nobody else. Elena stood up slowly, clutching her heavy leather visit binder to her chest, and looked directly at Jenna on the stage. Elena spoke in a calm, flat medical voice that carried across the silent basement, saying, "I am the primary registered nurse assigned to your mother's case. I have been inside that trailer 3 days a week for 4 years. Last winter, when the temperature dropped below 0, Maya and I had to fill out state emergency charity relief forms just to get your mother a donated space heater and free packages of adult diapers because Maya's bank account was completely overdrawn." Elena opened her heavy binder, flipping through the thick stack of state medical logs, and continued, "By state law, I have to document every person present during a medical visit. I have 1,147 logged visits in this binder. Every single entry says, 'Daughter Maya present, assisting with hygiene.' Your name is not listed on a single visitor log, Ms. Jenna. And when we tried to call your emergency contact number 2 years ago when your mother fell and broke her collarbone, the operator told us the line had been disconnected." Nobody moved. Nobody whispered. That was the moment the lie completely collapsed. There was no dramatic courtroom gasping, and Jenna didn't drop to her knees begging for forgiveness. The consequence was much quieter and much heavier. The entire room of church members, old neighbors, and family friends just stared at her with freezing, absolute disgust. Aunt Carol slowly slid her hand off Jenna's coat and stepped 2 paces away from her in the pew. Jenna's husband stood up from his chair, his face dark with embarrassment and horror as he realized his wife had left her dying mother to freeze in a trailer 20 minutes away from their country club neighborhood. Jenna looked out at the sea of cold, judging faces. She knew she had lost her social camouflage. She didn't apologize, and she didn't look at Mom sitting in her wheelchair by the display board. She just tightened the belt on her $2,000 coat, lifted her chin with stubborn, freezing arrogance, and said into the microphone, "I am not going to remain in a room where my family allows me to be abused." She stepped down from the stage and walked out the back doors of the church basement alone. Her husband didn't follow her. Nobody reached out to touch her arm, and nobody said goodbye. The heavy wooden doors clicked shut behind her, leaving her $12,000 watch ticking in an empty hallway. When the room settled, Elena walked over to the memory table. She didn't have a formal legal will from a fancy downtown lawyer. Mom hadn't had the money or the mind for a lawyer in years. Instead, Elena picked up Mom's old tin sewing box, the one she had kept hidden under her bed before the disease took her memory entirely. Elena brought the tin box over to where I was standing, pressed it into my hands, and said gently, "Your mother gave me this 3 years ago on one of her last clear mornings. She made me promise not to let your sister open it." I popped the rusted metal latch and lifted the lid. There was no deed to a secret house inside. There were no hidden bonds or jewelry. There was just a folded piece of yellow notebook paper written in Mom's shaky, uneven handwriting from the year she started forgetting how to shape her letters. It wasn't a polished movie quote. It was just the raw, broken words of a mother who knew her mind was dying. I unfolded the paper and read it through my tears. To my girls, my head is going away fast, and I am so scared. Jenna, you took your grandmother's diamond ring out of my jewelry box the day you left, so keep it. Maya, I am leaving you everything I have left in this world. I know you gave up your moving money and your life in Des Moines to stay in this trailer with me. I am so sorry that I am going to forget your name and your face. But please know that every time you touch my face or hold my hand in the dark, my body remembers that I am safe." I lifted the letter. Lying at the bottom of the rusted tin sewing box was $43 in crumpled bills and a tiny post-it note that read, "For Maya's new apartment." I stood in that damp church basement holding those crumpled bills, and for the first time in 4 years, I didn't feel poor, and I didn't feel like a victim. Tonight, I am sitting back in the drafty trailer. The little electric space heater is humming on the floor, glowing red in the dark living room. Mom is asleep in her worn recliner, covered in 2 heavy quilting blankets, her breathing soft and steady. Before I sat down, I walked over to the front door and looked at the old Samsonite suitcase with Mom's name written on the masking tape, the one Jenna left on my porch 4 years ago that I had been too angry and too exhausted to ever open. I unzipped the heavy brass zippers and pulled the lid back. There was nothing valuable inside. There was just Mom's old flannel house dress, her spare reading glasses wrapped in a washcloth, and a framed Polaroid photo from 1996. In the picture, Mom is wearing her Sunday dress, sitting on the front steps of our old house with her arms wrapped tightly around both Jenna and me when we were little kids. I didn't burn the photo, and I didn't throw it in the trash. I walked into the kitchen and stuck it right in the center of my refrigerator door with a magnet. I walked back into the quiet living room, sat down on the frayed carpet next to Mom's recliner, and reached out to take her thin, wrinkled hand in mine. Her eyelids fluttered open. She looked down at me in the dim red light of the space heater. For one brief, fleeting second, her eyes cleared, and she looked at me like she actually knew exactly who I was. Then the fog rolled back over her eyes. Her gaze drifted away toward the ceiling, and her eyelids closed again as she drifted back into her sleep. And that's okay, because I was the one who was here,